Thank you for joining our webinar today, Navigating E-Rate to Win in K-12. During today's webinar, we will discuss trends in K-12 technology, the E-Rate program, and how you can work with your school district customers to help them navigate and leverage the E-Rate program. Before we get into the webinar, I have just a few housekeeping things to take care of. First, today's webinar has been approved for BIXI Continuing Education credits for those of you who are attending the live presentation. If you want to receive the BIXI credits, at the end of the presentation, a survey will pop up. Simply fill in your email address and the first survey question to receive the Continuing Education credits. And we would invite you to complete the remainder of the survey as well. Also, all audience members have been muted. We will have time at the end of the presentation for a Q&A, so I encourage you to submit any questions that you have through the questions area in the console that's on your screen. We'll get to as many of the questions as we can at the end of the presentation. And finally, also in that console is a section marked Handouts. You will find a copy of the slides as well as an application guide that discusses on-campus wireless, and an E-Rate publication from Education Superhighway, which will be referenced during today's presentation. We invite you to download and review those documents for additional information. To get started, I'm pleased to introduce our speaker for today. Lindsay Kuhlman is a Business Development Manager for Panduit's Enterprise Business Unit. In this role, she specializes in vertical markets, including both K-12 and higher education. Lindsay joined Panduit in 2012, and prior to her current role, she was the Product Line Manager for Panduit's NetKey product line. And with that, I'll turn it over to Lindsay for today's presentation.
Thank you, Sandy, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon for our E-Rate webinar. The purpose of today's webinar is really to give you a high-level overview of the E-Rate program, introduce you to a few of the tools that may help you generate some leads to get some E-Rate business, and then go over a wireless update because that's a new emphasis of the E-Rate program for the past couple of years. So with that, we'll get started. I do want to point out that throughout the webinar, there will be 4 poll questions that we will ask you to answer. So just be prepared to click a little button when it pops up. So to go over our agenda, we'll start with an overview of the E-Rate program, give you an update for this year, for 2017. Then we'll move into some tips and tools of the trade, and then we'll do a wireless update at the end. As Sandy mentioned, if you have any questions as we go, please feel free to type those into the question box on your console, and we'll get to those at the end. All right. We're going to kick it off with a poll question. Our first poll question is just to give us an idea. So if you could go ahead and please rate your understanding of the E-Rate program to start off, and then we'll do this one again at the end just to see how we did. All right, the poll is now open. So please rate your understanding of the E-Rate program, 1 being you know nothing or very little, and then 5 being you are an E-Rate expert and probably know more than I do. All right, thank you, everyone. Pretty good mix here. All right, so with that, we'll go ahead and get started with our program overview. So what is E-Rate? The program was started in 1996, 1997 with the Telecommunications Act put into place by Bill Clinton with the goal of helping schools and libraries obtain access to technology at discounted rates. The program is owned by the FCC and administered by a nonprofit called the Universal Service Administration Company, which the abbreviation is USAC. You'll see that pretty often. The idea here is that everyone in the U.S. deserves accessible, affordable, and pervasive high-speed connectivity. So E-Rate actually provides subsidies for K-12 schools and libraries on 2 categories of products. Category 1 is your data transmission services and internet access and voice services, so your wide area network. And Category 2 are your internal connections, managed internal broadband services, and then the basic maintenance of those internal connections, so your local area network. The E-Rate program is funded via fees that you will see on local and long-distance phone service, which goes into the Universal Service Fund. So just to give more of a visual on Category 1 versus Category 2 on a typical school district network, you'll see on the left we show Category 1, this is your internet access, bringing the internet into the school district to their wide area network. And then Category 2 is your local area network and your Wi-Fi, in school, between schools, in classrooms, out to the personal devices. It should, Category 1 and Category 2 might be new terms to you. They used to be called Priority 1 and Priority 2. They've changed that terminology because there was some kind of a myth or an idea out there that Category 2 projects were not being funded because, Priority 1, they would focus on that, on getting the internet to the school, and then Priority 2, if there was any funding left over, then they would fund those. With the 2014 modernization order of E-Rate, they really want to put some more emphasis on Category 2 and getting schools up to date in terms of Wi-Fi. So they've changed the terminology. So priority and category are the same here. So back in 2014, the FCC set out to modernize the E-Rate program. So there was, historically, the program wasn't having a whole lot of success. Like I said, there was a lot of funding for Category 1 services, not so much for Category 2, and schools really needed that Category 2 support. So with the modernization order, they've done a couple of things. They set a bandwidth target at 100 megabits per 1,000 users for the short term, and a 1 gigabit per second per 1,000 users in the long term. They really want to close that Wi-Fi gap, like I mentioned, and offer more support for Category 2 services and transition support away from those legacy services like voice and video. They've also put into place some measures to maximize cost effectiveness of internet access and really reduce fraud and waste, which there was a lot of that going on with the E-Rate program for a long time. They've added $1 billion of annual support for Category 2 and put into place a per student budget for Category 2 of $150 pre-discount, which I'll go over that a little bit more in detail as we go further. And they increased the funding cap to $3.9 billion annually plus rollover funds. So if we look at 2016, we have the $1 billion set aside for Category 2, $3.9 billion funding, and then an inflation adjustment. So that actually meant that there's over $5 billion available for the funding year 2016, and probably a similar number for 2017 as well. Something to note for this 2014 modernization order, they also eliminated support for the components that you see at the bottom of the screen: circuit cards and components, interfaces, gateways, antennas, servers, software, storage devices, telephone components, video components, voice over IP and video over IP, and then components listed under data protection other than your firewalls and your battery backup. So like I mentioned on the previous slide, they are phasing out support for voice, which is Category 1. Category 2, voice is no longer eligible. So you can see here, based on your district's discount level and the year, you'll see when that this voice discount will be completely eliminated. By 2019, they will no longer be supporting voice applications. So let's take a look a little bit about how E-Rate is calculated. E-Rate is determined by the percentage of students eligible for the National School Lunch Program at the school level. So if you have less than 1% of your students who are eligible for the program, and then you have to take a look at your urban status versus your rural status. And those will, if we look across here, Category 1, urban discount for less than 1% is 20%. For rural is 25%. same for Category 2, and so forth. The thing to note here is that the discount level is based on your eligibility for the National School Lunch Program, not your participation in the National School Lunch Program. So whether or not the school district chooses to participate in the program, they're still eligible for E-rate funding. Down at the bottom, we have an example here about how we calculate a Category 2 budget. So if School A is the example school, they have 1,000 students and an 80% Category 2 discount rate. So that means if we look across, find our 80% Category 2 discount rate and move to the left, that means 50 to 74% of their student population is eligible for the National School Lunch Program. Our 5-year purchase limit for Category 2 is $150 per student times 1,000 students, which gives us an overall budget of $150,000 over 5 years. So to figure out what E-rate funds we have available, we take that $150,000 times our 80% discount rate, and that gives you $120,000 of E-rate funding available. The remaining $30,000 from that $150,000 is the out-of-pocket cost to the school, and a lot of schools will then rely on a state fund match program to cover the rest of that funding. And again, I should note that this is coming from the USAC website, and we'll also have these slides available to you to download for reference. Let's take a look at the Category 2 budget rules a little bit more in depth. So as I mentioned, each school is entitled to a pre-discount cap of $150 per student or a minimum building cap of $9,200. So for example, if the school is so small that their number of students times $150 is less than $9,200, they automatically will get that $9,200. E-rate money is allocated per school, not per district. So you cannot move your funds from one school to another. The funds that you apply for and receive must be spent during the funding year that you applied for them. The only caveat here is that you can use them through September 30th after the end of the fiscal year. You can also use the school's entire budget in 1 year or apply several times over 5 years. The thing to note here is if you receive the total budgeted funds for 1 year, you have to use them all that year or you'll lose them. So I would recommend, if you're unsure of exactly how you want to use the funds, or if the school district's unsure how they want to use the funds, only apply for what you know exactly you will need, and then you can reapply year after year. I had a little asterisk next to the $150 budget on the previous slide. With the 2014 modernization order, E-rate has actually agreed to adjust the budget due to inflation. So the funding year 2015, the base budget was $150, no inflation factor. So you can see the calculation here. 727 students times $150, no inflation factor. So their total category 2 budget is $109,000 or $109,050. For 2016 funding year, they've applied a 1% inflation factor. So that turns out to $151.50 per student. For 17, which is coming up in this June, they're implying a 1.3% inflation factor. So the new Category 2 budget starting in July of this year is $153.47 for Category 2 budgets per student. So you can see you're getting a couple $1,000s extra out of inflation that we wouldn't have had before. All right, let's go over the E-rate process a little bit. So I'm going to keep this pretty high level, and we'll go into some detail as we move further along. The top row here is the applicant process, so that's the school district or consortia or library. And the bottom row is the service provider, which is the contractor, installer, or what we typically call a service provider. So the first step in the E-rate process is the competitive bidding process. The applicant has to submit FCC Form 470, which is their request for bids. At this point, once those start coming in, you as service providers can start reviewing the posted forms on the USAC website and start responding to those bids. the applicant has to wait at least 28 days before evaluating and selecting a service provider. So that's part of the competitive bidding process. It has to be open that 28 days. It can be longer, but at minimum 28 days. So once those bids are evaluated and a service provider is selected and a signed contract or services are arranged, the next step is to apply for discounts once the window is open. And I'll go through the dates a little bit later. And so the next step is to fill out the Form 471. Form 471 is really a detailed documentation of what services and products we are going to be asking for E-rate funds for. As a service provider, it's really important to help your applicant fill these out because they need to make sure that they have good descriptions and understanding of the price for the services that they're applying for E-rate funding for. So once the Form 471 is complete within the filing window, it goes to review to the USAC program, and they do Program Integrity Assurance Reviews, PIA. Those are basically audits, and it's just making sure that everything that you're asking for is eligible under E-rate. They may come back to questions with questions to the applicant, so be prepared to help them answer those questions, and I'll go into some detail on that as well. So after that, at some point, you'll receive a funding commitment letter from the USAC. Once the funding commitment decision letter is received, services can begin, and you have to make sure that you fill out Form 486. I know there's a lot of forms that I'm talking about here. I'll go into some detail. I just want to give you a high-level overview of the program. So after services have started and everything is good there, then the invoicing part of the program can begin. And there are two types of invoicing options, and we'll go into those as well. So with E-rate, there are, like I said, two invoicing options. You have your billed entity applicant reimbursement option or your service provider invoicing option. With the BEAR option, FCC Form 472, this is used when the applicant, the school district or the school, has paid you, the service provider, in full and is seeking reimbursement for the discounted amount. In this case, the school or school district receives reimbursement direct from USAC. If the service provider invoice option is used, it's a different form, Form 474, and this is you as the contractor, the installer, or the service provider actually receiving the reimbursement. So in this case, the school has only paid the service provider the non-discounted portion of the cost of services, which means that you then have to go to USAC and file this form to receive reimbursement for the part that they did not pay. School districts really like this option because it doesn't make them pay as much upfront, but you have to really be comfortable with it and be comfortable with the program. What I've seen is that service providers are typically reimbursed within 30 days of submission of this form. So, has E-rate been successful? There's a lot of mixed opinions on this. In my opinion, I would say prior to 2014, it is questionable, closer to no. Post-2014 modernization order, there's definitely been a lot of results, tangible results that we've seen. So if we go over those, the percentage of school districts meeting the minimum connectivity targets that we talked about at the beginning rose from 30% to 77%. This is as of January of this year. The cost paid for bandwidth fell from $22 to $7 per megabit per second for best practice school districts. The program has paid out less than they budgeted for the past 2 years, which means those funds roll over to the next year, which is great because you open up more budget for future projects, but we're also not seeing as much waste as there used to be. And there's been a 61% decline in the schools not connected to fiber. So, just getting that internet access to the school district, a 61% decline is pretty huge. All right, with that, we're going to send out poll question number 2. Sorry guys, give us 1 second here. All right, thanks for being patient with us there for a second. So really, with this question, we just want to know if you have a dedicated E-rate resource on staff. This is just to give us an idea as to how much value people are putting on this program. It can help you, do really well with E-rate if you do have that dedicated resources, but it could be a full-time job for somebody. So just want to get a feel for that. All right, thank you. All right, so now we'll talk about the 2017 state of E-rate. Give you a quick overview. Now where's the program today? So the connectivity gap, this was the whole purpose that we started E-rate, right? Where does it stand today? 23% of school districts do not have enough bandwidth to meet their current digital learning needs. So that means today's learning needs, right? Not even looking out into the future. This translates to 11.6 million students affected by this lack of bandwidth. And if we look at the typical school district in this group, they're paying 6 times the amount paid by best practice districts for bandwidth. Something important to note down here at the bottom, by next year, this typical school district will need to grow their bandwidth at least 3 times to ensure they have enough Wi-Fi to support their digital learning needs. So there's a huge gap still out there, and E-rate's a really good tool now that they've kind of reorganized it with this modernization in order to go after this gap. We look at the list of this year's eligible services. You'll see Category 1 on the left, Category 2 on the right. Keep in mind that this list of eligible services changes every year. So if you're working with a school district, please make sure that whatever they are applying for E-rate for is actually an eligible service for E-rate. New for funding year 2016, which we're currently in, is leased dark fiber. So just keep that in mind. That's now an option for Category 1. If we look at Category 2, right, your access points, all your antennas, cabling and connectors, firewall services, switches, routers, all that stuff is still covered. So let's just go over some funding year 2017 dates to remember. And remember, this funding year 2017 starts July 1st of this year and goes to June 30th of 2018. The last date for school districts or schools to post Form 470 is April 13th of 2017. So make sure that you're keeping an eye on new Form 470s that are posted, because those are new opportunities for you to bid on. I imagine by now most of them are in, but there's still an opportunity through April 13th for them to submit those. The filing window for Form 471, which is the actual application for funding, opened on February 26th of this year and closes May 11th. Sometimes they'll extend that date, but depending on if there's any issues with the program, people are having problems. But for now, the date is set at May 11th at midnight. That window will close. If you are participating in Category 2 services for funding year 2017, they can start April 1st, but you cannot have any invoicing activity on them before July 1st. So it's really to give you, the beginning of the summer months to start work when the kids are out of school. Let's talk a little bit about the future of E-rate. There's a lot of uncertainty with budgeting and support for programs and stuff with the new administration. So there's some concern that E-rate may be a target as well. However, let's talk about that. So the new FCC chairman has expressed support for the program in the past. His only issues with it is that it's pretty difficult to navigate, and feels that rural schools aren't necessarily getting the same support as urban schools. So there may be opportunity here to actually streamline the program, even it out, and make it easier for everybody to use. So I think this is good news. The program has always had bipartisan support, and that's likely to remain, right? Schools in every congressional district throughout the United States rely on this program. So it's not, a red program or a blue program. It's a school program that everybody needs to get infrastructure. There's really 2 scenarios that I see happening here. based on what I've been reading. You know, E-rate, it's possible that it becomes a target of the new administration as a spending cut. The other option here, which I think is probably more likely, is that it gets rolled into the overall infrastructure improvement efforts and the funding will continue. It may look a little bit different than it does today, but if you think about it, right, why shouldn't broadband access be as important as roads, clean water, and electricity for improving the overall infrastructure status of the country? Keep in mind that future funding is not guaranteed. So even though the cap was raised, it doesn't mean they have to appropriate it. So, you know, even as it stands today, even if they make no changes, they don't have to necessarily approve any of the applications coming in. So we'll know better in a couple months how E-rate looks in the future, I think. All right, let's go over a couple tools to help you navigate the program a bit and get some value out of it. So conversations, this will help you understand the timing of when to do what for E-rate. So in the spring, talk to your school districts about their plans for next funding year's projects. So this spring, be talking to your schools about funding year 18 projects. What type of projects will they have? Do they plan on applying for E-rate? Finalize those plans for the summer work of this year, and then make sure you have your Form 498 completed. This is your service provider identification number, and it just allows you to participate in the program. In the summertime, June, July, be on the lookout for the next funding year. So this summer, next funding year is the funding year 2018. Be on the lookout for those next RFPs and Form 470s so that you can be bidding on those early. Then in late summer through winter, that's when we want to be responding to those RFPs and those Form 470 reports as they come in. Make sure that you really try and understand the bid evaluation criteria, which I'll give some insight on the next slide. And then winter to springtime, which is where we're at now, help your end users, your school districts, fill out those Form 471s, and make sure you have Form 473 on file. That's your service provider annual certification. You have to have that on there for invoicing to happen. Let's take a look at an example of bid evaluation criteria here. When schools are deciding on vendors for E-rate, for the competitive bidding process, the price of services and goods has to be weighted higher than any other factor in their bid evaluation matrix. So this is just an example from USAC that they provide that you can see. So here's your 5 factors over here on the left. The price of eligible products and services gets 30 points out of 100, and it's the highest of all the point values. The next couple factors that they've got here as examples are prior experience with the vendor. So, you know, if the school has worked with you before and they like you, that's going to earn you some points. Prices for ineligible services, products, and fees, that also gets incorporated because, you know, there are things that are not eligible for E-rate funds, but they're still necessities, and the overall bid for the project, right, has to be cost competitive. So if you can make sure that those prices are competitive as well, you'll be in good shape. The fourth one down here is flexible invoicing. So this is the billed entity reimbursement model or the service provider reimbursement model. If you can offer flexible invoicing to a customer, they're really going to appreciate that. And I know it's definitely a risk for you guys to only bill the school for their discounted services and you get the reimbursement from USAC. But again, if you want to, if it's a really competitive situation, it may be something you want to consider, you know, letting them do. And then local or in-state vendor, that, you know, could be something that somebody cares about. If we look here, the top, so price of eligible products and services has the most points available. Vendor 1 scored a 15, vendor 2 scored a 30, which is the most points, and vendor 3 scored a 25. If we take vendor 3 and look all the way down at the bottom, they ended up with the most points overall, right? So even though they weren't the most price competitive for eligible products and services, all of their other factors, having prior experience with them, their prices for ineligible services, offering flexible invoicing, all of those things actually made up for, the 5 points they lost on prices of eligible products and services to help them win out at the end. All right, so we already looked at this slide, the E-rate process, but I just wanted to throw some dates in here, and I apologize if you can't see the bottom of my slides. The competitive bidding process really is that summer to fall time frame. Right, so starting in July through, really, it can keep going through April 13th of this year, but for the most part, the action's happening, July through September, October timeframe. And then you're waiting at least 28 days once that bid evaluation has been received. And then the filing window typically opens January, February. This year was a little bit later, but keep an eye out for that filing window announcement to come out. And then your services are starting sometime usually between April and July, or at most 120 days after receipt of your funding commitment letter. So let's talk about when you actually start services. When can you do that? They can start before a funding commitment decision letter is received. However, that's really on you and the school district to determine. It's a business decision, right? No funding is guaranteed with this program, and USAC will not provide reimbursement until an FCDL has been received. So you can start those in April, but if you haven't received your funding letter yet, or if the school hasn't received their funding letter yet, it's a risk that they're not actually going to get the E-rate funds. File Form 486, which is the form that says, hey, services have started, only when services have started and invoicing can begin, or before those services have started, if you received an FCDL and those services are going to start in July. The applicant, so the school, must be in compliance with the Children's Internet Protection Act, which is basically just, an internet protection policy at the school district that helps with blocking content and things like that. And then this form has to be filed no later than 120 days after the service start date or after the date of the funding commitment decision letter, whichever is later. Non-recurring services, so just like an installation, for example, or some MAC work, can occur through September 30th after the end of the funding year. All right, there are a lot of tools out there for E-rate. There's some, with USAC itself, there are some private tools as well that you can purchase if you are interested in those, but I wanted to go over what's out there for free for anybody to gather. All of the information on the E-rate program from USAC is 100% public and can be accessed on their website. They have a complete E-rate toolbox, and I'll just go through some of those for you. So on the left, we have funding tools. So you can search the commitments by the year, the applicant name, or their number, just to see who's received a funding letter and who has not. And then the other one that I would point you to on this one is the deadlines tool at the bottom, and this will help you calculate the deadlines for all of the forms and steps along the way for each year. So some of them have to be calculated dates based on when a letter was received or when services have started. So this tool will help you figure out exactly how to keep yourself organized along through the process. If we look over on the right side of the window, FCC Form 470 tool, this is really where you want to go to help mine leads from E-rate. So this is where all of the data will go when a school or a school district or a library, whoever, submits a Form 470 for the funding year. So you can look back at historic data, but most importantly, you can look at data for this year, right? You can go in and pull anyone who submitted a Form 470 for by geography, by name, whatever, and figure out exactly what they are looking for in terms of services and products. And that's where you want to go to to actually mine those opportunities and figure out what you want to bid on. The other tool that I found to be really interesting is from Education Superhighway, which is another nonprofit that does a lot of work with E-rate and states to try and help the states understand how to support the E-rate program. They have a ton of data here, but something that's really interesting is called the Compare and Connect tool. And this basically takes all of that E-rate data that USAC has and it puts it into a geographic tool that you can mine by application type, so whether you're interested in schools that don't have enough bandwidth, or schools that are not on fiber yet, or schools that are reporting insufficient wireless. You can select, so this what I'm showing you here on the screen is schools that report insufficient wireless for Illinois, which is where we are, lovely Illinois today. And you can see all these little orange dots are schools or school districts that are reporting insufficient wireless. So you can mine this by a county, by a zip code, download the whole map data into an Excel file to filter more easily. But it'll show you, so their current status for Rochester Community School District down in central Illinois. Currently they're saying some schools are reporting insufficient wireless coverage. Goal here being to upgrade so that they have reliable wireless for digital learning. And then what exactly their Form 470 is looking for. So here they're looking for antennas, connectors, and related components, and likely installation as well. So lots of data here to mine to pull out opportunities for you. All right, let's go over some do's and don'ts of the program, because this is, a government program, so there's obviously lots of rules. So let's start with the don'ts, and then we'll do the do's, because don'ts are angry. So don't in any way help with FCC Form 470. This is that request for bids. Even just clerical work or data entry is an absolute no for the Form 470. You cannot influence that competitive bid process in any way. Don't provide kickbacks, gifts, incentives to schools to try and incentivize them to choose you for the process. Just stay out of it. The other big don't here is don't try to bundle those ineligible costs with the eligible costs, because they'll probably find it out. So let's take a look at some do's. Do consider having an E-rate expert on your staff, whether that's a dedicated person to the E-rate program or just somebody that knows a lot about it and has done it before. It'll make your lives a lot easier, and if you can have that person get together with someone at a school that also knows a lot about E-rate, you'll be in good shape for applying and staying up to date with the program and doing things on time and all that. Do entertain flexible invoicing if you're willing to take that risk on. It's a competitive edge that you can offer, so just keep that in mind. Definitely assist with Form 471. That's all the details, right? All of the product information, pricing, service descriptions that schools will need your help on. So make sure that they've got that accurate, and so the process will go much more smoothly if you can do that. Also be prepared to answer program integrity insurance questions that come up. The schools don't really know when this is coming. They have, I believe, 15 days to respond to them when they come through. Some things that they might be asking you for are like network diagrams, additional service descriptions, which is why it's important to fill out that Form 471 completely when you can, because you don't want them coming back to ask for additional descriptions, or just other things about your services, just to make sure they've checked all the boxes and know exactly what the application funding is going towards. With that, we will send up poll question number 3. And this is a repeat of the first one, just to kind of level set. Please rate your understanding of the E-rate program again. We'll see how we're doing here. All right, I see a little bit of shift. That's good. Okay, we'll close that. And now we will move away from the E-rate program itself and more on the wireless update, just because there is a new emphasis on wireless for E-rate. So these are the recommendations that they're putting out there for Category 2 equipment for wireless specifically. So for access points, best practice recommendations are 1 per classroom, more in common areas, and they're recommending 802.11 AC Wave 1 access points. For controllers, cloud-based controllers offering flexibility. Make sure you consider that during the RFP process, so something to throw out there for the end user. Switches, 1 gigabit per second copper ports with fiber expansion and support of PoE+. That's really for the access points, right? A lot of the access points are now running off of PoE. Routers that are recommending that the ports support 10 gig per second. For structured cabling, the recommendation is that copper needs to be Cat5e or greater, which is kind of a given, right? I would say, and Panduit recommends Category 6A for wireless, and I'll go into a little bit more detail on that in a bit. And I do say that new installation should be Cat 6A. 10 gig fiber between closets, 10 gig fiber for wide area network connections. For racks and patch panels, just make sure you include that as part of the cabling RFP, or make sure the school district has that included so that it's not forgotten. For uninterruptible power supply, UPS, battery backup, they recommend that you don't use E-rate to fund that because they have a short life and you cannot reuse them after, you can't move them around for 3 years, right? So just maybe leave those out of E-rate. Keep in mind that firewalls and caching services are covered under Category 2, and so are managed Wi-Fi options. So if we look over on the right side, like I said, Category 6A is our recommendation for future-proofing and PoE. The education standard calls for 2 Category 6A drops per wireless access point, and that's really, so A for future-proofing. If you pull 2 cables when you're installing the cable at the front end, it's much easier to add an additional access point when you need density in the future. And then, failover, it's just an option. Make sure that you are aware of plenum and air handling space. Panduit has a recently launched full plenum offering: jacks, surface mount boxes, patch cords, cables, J-hooks. I think everything you need in the plenum space is now plenum rated from Panduit. We recommend, and the standard recommends, that your density is 1.2 access points per classroom, and that's just to give you a little bit extra space for density in the future. As digital learning continues to grow, there's always going to be the need for more bandwidth with wireless. And then, again, we recommend fiber between the closets. What's really driving wireless in K-12? First and foremost, there's a student expectation that wireless at school is wireless at home, right? They're equivalent. You have ubiquitous access everywhere you go, and so we want to make sure that we're really covering the school just like you would expect wireless in your home. There's definitely an increase in utilization of technology in the classroom, so one-to-one device programs, sharing of content via things like Apple TV, things like that. Lots more of that going on than there has in the past. All the students have an iPad, they're projecting, sharing content in real time in the classroom. And then you have to consider the impact of the Internet of Things, right? There's so many sensors and much more data collection going on about our environment that's all going over your wireless network as well. So if we look at technology as a learning tool, again, in the classroom, the wireless network is being used for streaming videos, hosting things like online chat rooms for in-class participation, personal communication, emergency communication, video conferencing, lots of bandwidth-intensive applications. If we look outside of the classroom, in common areas, libraries, things like that, students are taking many more online courses than they have in the past. So 1 in 3 students now is taking an online course, even in the K-12 level. They're doing lots of research, right? in the library. All of that is wireless. And then again, communication, both personal, emergency, and professional between staff members or parents. So TIA 4966 is the education standard. These are their wireless recommendations. They have developed the Technical Service Bulletin 162 to provide guidance on installation and cabling of access points. The standard says that each location for an access point should be served by a minimum of 1 horizontal cable, and like I said, 2 cables per access point are recommended. And Category 6A cable is recommended for all new installations. We'll go into some options for utilizing your existing Cat5e, Cat6 cable for higher bandwidth wireless, but at the end of the day, Cat6A, 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 especially with E-rate, when you want to get the most bang for your buck while the funding is available. So there's really 2 paths to take for wireless improvements. First, you want to improve your coverage. Make sure you've got coverage in every corner of the building. This really addresses safety concerns and then overall experience for both your students and your staff. We recommend that schools conduct a wireless site survey to determine their coverage needs and potential interference to help them build that technology plan to then apply for E-rate funding for the actual access points and cabling and installation and all of that. So if you have a school that's really suffering from, poor wireless coverage, maybe recommend to them they do this wireless site survey to get a good feel for what exactly they should be applying for E-rate funds for. And then the second path that people take is increasing capacity. So this is once you've got a good base wireless network and you realize that you need some additional capacity because there's more students or more devices or higher, more demanding applications like lots more video streaming, you want to make sure that your wireless network is very reliable. So you can use your existing Cat5e and Cat6 cable to minimize the cost to deploy new access points for brownfield applications only. There's a new N-base-T standard, which I will go over, that supports 2.5 gig or 5 gig over 1 gig cabling. But again, and I know I probably sound repetitive here, but Cat6A is our recommendation for all new installations. So what we're looking at here is a wireless access point roadmap from 2012 to the current year. So just to give you some history as to how it's been evolving. Over on the left-hand side is 3 levels of access points. So you have your high-end access points at the top, your mid-range access points in the middle, and then your low-end access points at the bottom. At the very bottom of the chart, you'll see the corresponding Ethernet speed for the high-end access points. The bottom Ethernet speed correlates with the top, or corresponds to the top high-end access points. You'll see down here, down the bottom, 2.5 and 5 gig, I've got highlighted as new options. For schools, for K-12, we're really probably looking at that mid-range and the low-end access points. So you'll see is that for mid-range access points, starting this year, they really require 2.4 gigs. That's more than 1 gig cabling, right? So we can now support, based on this new standard, we can support these access points with your existing 1 gig cabling, or install Category 6A and you have 10 gigs to work with and you still have a lot of room here. But the bottom line is, for mid-range and low-end, we're now past the point where 1 gig cabling can support your access points, unless you are utilizing this new standard, which I will go over. So 2.5 and 5 gig base T, or N-base-T. You may also hear it called Next Generation Enterprise Access Base T, and this is, again, used for when greater than 1 gig is needed for access points. IEEE has developed 802.3BZ, which is the standard for this, over legacy Cat5e and Cat6 cabling. The thing that you have to be concerned with here is your bundled length. So if you look over on the right, these are, so green is good, right? Yellow is not so good, red is not good at all. The top chart is bundled length less than or equal to 50 meters. What this is telling you is that Cat5e and Cat6A there's no risk for running 2.5 gig or 5 gig over those existing cables. You really have to do, some testing here with your existing infrastructure to make sure that this application will work. When your bundle length is between 50 and 75 meters, you're still okay for 2.5 gig across Cat5e or Cat6 cables. When we move up to 5 gig, Cat5e becomes a risk, and you have to make sure you're doing some potential mitigation there. Category 6A will still support 5 gig, no problem. When we move to 75 to 100 meter bundle length, this is where we really run into some issues. So 2.5 gig is no problem again over Cat5e, Cat6, you're still safe. 5 gig, Cat5e, absolutely not going to work for you, right? You're really running some risk there if you're trying to push Cat5e over, or push 5 gig over Cat5e. Even Category 6 is a risk. So if you've got a long bundled length between 75 and 100 meters, your probably safest bet is to go with Category 6A. The reason for this is alien crosstalk, right? So alien crosstalk is not specified or controlled for with Category 5e and Category 6. It was never needed. With this new standard, it becomes an issue. So Cat 6A obviously will work for you, but as your bundling length is longer, alien crosstalk is going to be more of a concern. So, like I've been, spewing out for the past 15 minutes, 20 minutes, install Category 6A for all your greenfield installations. The wireless technology, as you're seeing in that chart that I showed, is improving at a drastic rate, right? Much faster than cabling keeps up. So Category 6A is going to ensure the viability of your cabling for the longest possible time with your wireless application. Category 6A is also the most efficient cable for PoE use. So this is very important, especially if your access points are PoE enabled and you want to make sure you're using that technology. Category 6A has more copper and so is therefore more efficient for power usage. And again, I recommend that 2 6A cables per access point because it's much easier to add that density later. If we look here, this is why I brought up PoE, this chart on the bottom here, wireless access points are the second most common use of PoE, and we expect that to continue over the next 3 years or so. It'll be skyrocketing there compared to the other applications. So just keep that in mind as you're making recommendations for wireless and PoE installations. And with that, I wanted to leave you with this message that you can then take to your education customers. Is your infrastructure ready to support the influx of wireless technology that's coming our way or is already here? At the end of the day, a robust cabling design enables the deployment of wireless technologies that are going to improve the academic experience and meet the increasing demands of students. So, to deploy all of the ed tech goals that we have out there, we really need to make sure that the school's cabling infrastructure is solid and ready to go and really future-proof for the next 5 to 10 years. With that, our final poll question. Which of these PoE applications are your K-12 customers deploying? Oh, and it looks like it says select all that apply, but you can only choose one. So choose the one that you're seeing most frequently. And with that, we will open it up to questions if there are any.
All right. We do have a couple of questions that have come in. If there are additional questions, please feel free to type those into the question box on your console, and we'll get to as many as we can in the next couple of minutes that we have left. So for the first one, I've heard that Category 2 applications never get funded. Is that true?
It used to be true. It's not true anymore. So the past couple of years, right, it's really starting in 2015, there's been much more of an emphasis on Category 2, and so we're starting to see those funded, and they're dedicated some funding resources to it. So no longer a concern as much as it used to be.
Okay. Are there any components or applications that we should avoid because they commonly are not approved?
The applications that I would keep an eye out for are voice over IP and any AV that's IP or twisted pair based, or AV in general, right? So voice and audiovisual are not supported by E-rate. They're not, the goal of E-rate is to bring internet access to schools, not to support voice and, AV applications. So just make sure that you're not trying to submit for funding for those types of things.
Okay, great. Did the newly released, I think that you might have touched on this earlier, Lindsay, but did the newly released Trump budget cut E-rate at all?
It did not. We squeaked by with this last one, but time will tell, like I said, in the next couple of months, if E-rate remains as is or if we'll see any changes coming down the pike for that.
All right. How do you become a service provider for E-rate?
You really have to go onto the USAC website and get an account for the EPC portal, which is where all of the E-rate activity starts or happens, and you have to make sure you have a service provider identification number and a service provider annual certification on file. And then it's really just about bidding on those Form 470 projects with schools and libraries. Just make sure that you're keeping an eye on that activity and you understand the timelines, so that when those bids are put out there, you can respond to them quickly. And that's really all there is to it. There's obviously much more back-end paperwork and things, but in terms of getting into the program, you just have to have an ID on file, an annual certification, and then respond to the bids as they open.
And somebody asked, is there a cost to join that program?
No, there is no cost.
Okay. What would you say is the benefit for the provider with participating with the E-rate program?
The benefit, it really depends on where you are. And so if you're in an area where there are a lot of schools utilizing the E-rate program, the benefit to you is that you'll be able to bid on those projects versus not being able to, because the service provider and the applicant have to be in E-rate together. If you're in an area where schools are not really utilizing E-rate, like it's a more affluent area and the schools don't really get that much of a discount, they're probably not going to bother with it. So just understand, you can go, there's tools on the USAC website that will tell you district by district, zip code by zip code, what the eligibility, where it lies in terms of that discount matrix. And so understand the schools in your area to know if you should even be concerned with E-rate or not.
I think maybe we have time for one more. If you don't do active components, is it even worth bidding E-rate anymore? The days of 10 cables a classroom seem to be gone, and most bids seem to be packaged now. Are you finding that to be the case?
Yeah, so I think with the emphasis on wireless, if you're not doing access point installation and switches and things like that, it probably isn't worth it to put a whole lot of focus on E-rate. I guess would be my answer to you. I don't have a lot of insight into that, but just the emphasis on wireless over everything else, and just trends in technology going wireless, I would say that that's probably an accurate statement.
All right. Actually, we've got another minute left. We've got one quick question here I think that you can answer quickly. Hosted VoIP services, will they or will they not be eligible for E-rate after 2019?
I believe they will not be, but I'll have to check on the answer to that. I think after 2019, those are all eliminated from the program altogether.
All right. So to be respectful of your time, we'll go ahead and wrap this up. I want to thank Lindsay for sharing such great insight with us. I hope you're all able to put it to good use as you work with your K-12 customers. A couple of reminders. Download the assets. There's some valuable links in the presentation, so be sure to download the PDF of the presentation, which can be found in that handouts area. And we'd also like to remind you to complete the survey. As soon as we stop the webinar, the survey will pop up so you can request your BIXI credits and then also complete the survey for us. We've also recorded today's webinar, and we will be sending out a link to this. If you feel there was valuable information here that you would like to share with other people in your organization, feel free to share that with them so that they can listen to the on-demand webinar once it's posted. And then on behalf of Panduit, I would just want to thank you for attending today's presentation on E-Rate. We encourage you to take a look at the resources and then reach out to your local account reps if you have any additional questions or if you need additional information. Thank you.
Thank you.